Welcome, story lovers. I'm your regular storyteller, here to help you drift into a peaceful sleep. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, share it, and subscribe for more stories that will help you drift off peacefully. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if there's any story you'd love to hear next, feel free to share it below. The first thing I noticed was that my mail was being forwarded to an address that didn't exist. I only found out because a piece of certified mail came back to the post office with a stamp that said undeliverable and listed the forwarding address as 14 Harrow Lane. But there is no 14 Harrow Lane in this county. There has never been a 14 Harrow Lane in this county, and when I called the post office to ask how long my mail had been going there, the woman on the phone went quiet for a moment and then said, "Sir, this forwarding request has been active for 7 years. I hadn't moved in 11 years. I hadn't filed any forwarding request, and whatever had been sent to me in those 7 years, I never received it." I want you to understand something about who I am before I keep going, because I think it matters for how you hear the rest of this. I am not a dramatic person. I am not someone who jumps to conclusions. I spent 22 years as a land surveyor, which means my entire professional life was built around precision, around measurement, around not assuming anything until the numbers confirmed it. I do not believe in coincidences the way other people don't believe in them, dramatically, as a rhetorical device. I mean, I genuinely, methodically, do not accept that two related anomalies are unrelated until I've exhausted every logical alternative. So when I tell you what I found over the next several months, I need you to know that I questioned everything. I verified everything I could. And what I am telling you is what the evidence showed me, even when the evidence started showing me things that I did not have a framework to understand. My name is not something I'm going to share, and the town I live in isn't something I'm going to name. And I am aware that this makes me sound like every other person on the internet who claims to have a story they're too frightened to fully tell. But I'm going to give you enough that you understand this is real. And by the end, I think you'll understand why the specific details don't matter as much as the pattern does. Because the pattern is the thing that will stay with you, not the names. I live alone. I have lived alone since my wife left in 2013, which was not a dramatic or painful separation. We had simply grown into different people, and we both knew it, and we made a clean break and remained on polite terms until she moved to another state in 2016. I have a small house on about 3 acres, rural but not remote. I can see my neighbor's porch light from my kitchen window, which becomes important later. I have one close friend, a man I'll call Garrett, who I've known since college. And beyond him, my social circle is limited to co-workers and the occasional conversation with my neighbor, a retired woman in her 70s who keeps geese and does not bother anyone. The mail forwarding thing happened in March. By April, I had filed a formal complaint with the Postal Service, changed my mailbox lock, and largely moved on, because the Postal Service's investigation turned up nothing conclusive, and I am practical enough to know when I've hit a dead end. But in April, I also noticed something else, something I might not have noticed if I hadn't already been in the habit of paying closer attention than usual. My recycling bin, the large blue one at the end of my driveway that gets picked up every other Tuesday, was being placed back at the end of my driveway after collection, facing the wrong direction. The handle faces the street when I put it out. When I found it after collection, the handle faced the house, every time. I tested it 4 times over 2 months. I put the bin out with the handle facing the street. I retrieved it with the handle facing the house. You might think this is the garbage collectors, some automatic motion of their arm when they set it back down, but I had never noticed this before. And more importantly, the bin is not just turned around. It is placed about 18 inches closer to the house than where I left it. 18 inches consistently across 4 separate collection days. Someone was moving it after collection. Someone was moving it back almost, but not quite to where it had been, and rotating it, and whoever was doing it did not know which direction the handle was supposed to face. I did not tell Garrett about the recycling bin. I told him about the mail forwarding because that was genuinely alarming and logistically impactful, but the recycling bin felt like the kind of thing you keep to yourself, because the moment you say it out loud to another person, you hear how it sounds. A recycling bin facing the wrong way, 18 inches off. I know how it sounds. But I wrote it in a notebook. I started keeping a notebook in April, just a plain brown composition notebook that I kept in my desk drawer, and I wrote down dates and observations, and I want you to understand that at this point, I still believed there was a rational explanation. I believed someone was using my driveway to turn around, or a neighborhood kid was messing with things, or the collection crew had simply changed their habits. I was not frightened. I was curious and slightly annoyed and methodical. The notebook became important in June when I found the photograph. I had been cleaning out my basement, not a dramatic cleaning. Just the kind of gradual reorganization you do when you've lived somewhere for over a decade and the boxes have started to accumulate a sedimentary logic that no longer makes sense. I was moving a stack of boxes that had been against the east wall, boxes I hadn't touched in years, and behind them, pushed into the corner where the wall meets the floor, was a photograph. Face down, a 4x6 print, the kind you get developed at a pharmacy, slightly yellowed at the edges. I picked it up and turned it over and felt a sensation that I don't have a precise word for, a sensation that starts in the center of your chest and moves outward in both directions at once, cold and hot simultaneously. The photograph was of my living room. My living room as it currently was, the same couch, the same lamp, the same stack of books on the side table that I had been meaning to shelve for months. The photograph was recent, meaning it had been taken sometime in the last year, because the lamp was a lamp I had purchased in late 2022 and hadn't owned before that. The angle was from the corner near the front door, looking toward the couch, and whoever took it was standing inside my house. There was no one visible in the photograph. Just my living room, in good lighting, in the middle of what appeared to be a sunny afternoon, completely normal except for the fact that I had not taken it, and I had not given anyone permission to be in my house. I checked my doors, I checked my windows, I changed my locks that same week, all of them front and back, and I added a sliding bolt to the back door that required a key I kept on my person. I checked the photograph for any identifying information, a timestamp on the back, a watermark, anything, and found nothing. I went to 3 different local pharmacies and asked if they had records of who had printed a 4x6 photograph of a specific kind in the past 12 months. And 2 of them told me they didn't keep those records, and one of them asked me to leave, which I understood. I wrote all of this in the notebook. The feeling I had when I turned that photograph over was not, I realized later, primarily fear. It was recognition. It was the feeling of recognizing a pattern that has been visible all along, and suddenly understanding that you have been standing inside it without knowing. The mail forwarding, the recycling bin, the photograph, someone had been paying attention to me. Someone had built a system around me, quiet and patient, and I had been living inside that system without knowing it existed. In July, Garrett came to visit for a long weekend, as he does every summer, and on the second night after dinner, I told him everything. I showed him the notebook. He is the kind of person who takes things seriously without catastrophizing them, which is why he's been my closest friend for 30 years, and he sat with the notebook for a long time, and then he asked me a question that I had not yet asked myself. He said, "Is there anyone from your past who might want you to know they're watching you? Not anyone who would want to harm me, anyone who would want me to know." And I sat with that distinction for a moment, because it is a precise and important distinction, and then I thought of Marcus Ellery. I need to tell you about Marcus Ellery carefully, because he is the center of this and I want to get it right. I met Marcus in 2007 through work. He was not a surveyor, but he worked for a civil engineering firm that contracted with our office periodically, and we became friendly in that way that work acquaintances sometimes do. Lunch a few times a month, the occasional drink after a long project. He was quiet, intelligent, precise, the kind of person who chose his words very carefully and listened more than he spoke. I liked him. I genuinely liked him. He lived alone, had no family in the area, and I think in retrospect that I was probably one of his only real social connections in those years, though at the time I didn't think about it in those terms. In 2011, Marcus was involved in an accident. A car accident on the highway about 40 miles from here, in February, in bad weather. The car went off an overpass. The car was recovered from the river below, badly damaged. Marcus was not in the car when it was recovered. The assumption, given the condition of the car and the water and the temperature, was that he had been ejected and carried downstream. There was a search. The search was called off after 9 days. Marcus Ellery was declared missing, and after the legally required waiting period, presumed dead. I went to a small memorial service that his firm held. I said something to the small group of people who gathered. I felt genuine grief, the kind that comes with losing someone you considered a real friend, even if the friendship was quieter than most. And then life continued, as it does, and Marcus Ellery became someone I thought about occasionally, less and less, until years had passed and he was a memory rather than a presence. That was 2011. The mail forwarding had started, according to the post office, in 2016, 5 years after Marcus supposedly died. I told Garrett this, and he looked at me for a long time, and then he said, "You need to know if he's alive." And I said yes. I already knew that was the next step. The question was, how to take it. I want to be precise about what I was thinking and feeling at this point, because I think it would be easy from the outside to assume I was frightened, and I was. But that wasn't the dominant emotion. The dominant emotion was something more complex. It was the disorientation of having a story you thought was finished turn out to still be happening. Marcus Ellery had been, in my understanding of reality, a closed chapter, a tragedy. And now I was holding evidence that the chapter had never closed, that he had been alive, or that someone who knew him had been doing this, or that I was making connections that weren't there. I needed to know which of those things was true. I started with the engineering firm. It no longer existed under the same name, having been acquired by a larger firm around 2015, but I found an HR manager through a professional directory who had worked there at the time and agreed to speak with me when I explained I was trying to locate a former colleague. She remembered Marcus. She said he had been unusual in that he had no emergency contact on file, no next of kin, no beneficiary designated for his pension, which had eventually been absorbed into a general account after the presumed death ruling. She said the only other notable thing about his file was that he had taken an unusual amount of personal leave in the 18 months before his death, and that on 2 occasions he had requested leave to handle, quote, personal documentation matters, which she said at the time she assumed meant something like a legal issue or a medical situation, but which she admitted now could mean a lot of things. Personal documentation matters. Someone building a new identity takes time off work to handle personal documentation matters. I found his name in the county records because death records are public and the presumed death filing would be there. And it was filed in 2013, everything normal. What was not in the county records, but what I found after several weeks of searching through archived local newspaper databases, was a brief article from 2010, a year before the accident, in which Marcus Ellery was mentioned in connection with a regional surveying conference. He was listed as attending with our firm, which was accurate, but the article also mentioned his hometown, and the hometown listed was not the one he had told me when I'd asked him once where he was from. He had told me a small town in the upper Midwest. The article listed a town in a completely different state on the other coast. I do not know if he lied to me or if the article was wrong, but I wrote it in the notebook. In September, I found the second photograph. This one was not hidden. This one was on my kitchen table when I came home from work on a Tuesday. I had locked my door. I had changed my locks. The doors and windows showed no signs of forced entry. The photograph was face up this time, and it was a photograph of me. I was walking from my car to my front door. I was wearing the grey jacket I wore most days last autumn. I was not looking at the camera. The angle was from above and to the right, which meant it was taken from either a drone or from somewhere elevated. And there is a large oak tree at the edge of my property that would provide that angle, that exact angle, if someone climbed it and waited. Beneath the photograph, written in pencil on the back of an envelope, were 6 words. "You never came to the river." I sat down. I sat down at my kitchen table, and I looked at those 6 words for a long time, and I understood them immediately, which is the part that I think about most when I am lying awake at night. I understood them immediately because they were true. After the memorial service, after the 9-day search, after the calls stopped and the conversations moved on, I had never gone to the river. I had never stood at the overpass and looked down. Some people do that. When someone dies, they go to the place, they stand in it. They grieve in a geographic way. I had not done that. I had not thought about doing it. And now, someone, presumably the man who had been presumed dead in that river, had noticed. had kept track of what I did and did not do, had perhaps waited. I want to pause here and tell you what I did not do, because I think the choices we make in moments like this reveal something about us. I did not call the police. I had thought about calling the police at several points in the previous months, but each individual piece of evidence, while unsettling, was hard to present as a coherent threat. Mail forwarding irregularities, a recycling bin, a photograph from inside my house, yes, that was something, but without a name to give them, without anything more than a feeling and a pattern, I had not felt confident that the response would be anything more than a report filed and a follow-up that never came. Now I had a note. Now I had a sentence that implied a specific person with a specific grievance. I considered calling them, but the note did not feel like a threat. I want to be very careful about this because I am aware of how it sounds, aware that what I am about to say could be read as rationalization by someone who is in over their head. The note did not feel like a threat. It felt like an accusation. There is a difference. A threat is forward-looking. It describes what is going to happen. An accusation is backward-looking. It describes what you did. You never came to the river is not a promise of what is coming. It is a statement about what was absent. It is grief, articulated in the language of someone who has been watching and measuring and recording, which is, I realized with a specific kind of chill, exactly what I would do if I were in tremendous pain and had a lot of time and a need to be precise. I went to the river. I went on a Saturday in late September, in the morning, and I drove the 40 miles and I parked near the overpass and I walked down to the bank and I stood there. The water was low in September. You could see the rocks on the bottom in some places. I stood there for probably 20 minutes and I felt many things, grief being one of them, which surprised me. Grief for a man I thought I had already grieved. Grief that felt different now that I understood it was possibly misplaced the first time, or possibly not misplaced at all. Because even if Marcus Ellery had survived that night, something had ended in that river. Something had gone into the water and had not come back. I did not see anyone while I was there. I drove home, I checked my house, everything was undisturbed. I wrote in the notebook, I made dinner, I went to sleep. 3 days later, there was a new photograph on my kitchen table. This one was of the river. The overpass from below at an angle in the morning light, taken on the same morning I had been there. I was almost certain because the light was the same, and a particular piece of debris, a blue plastic bag caught on a rock at the river's edge, was visible in both what I remembered seeing and what I saw in this photograph. And in the lower right corner of the photograph, just barely visible, the edge of a grey jacket, my jacket. I was in the photograph, he had been there, he had watched me. I told Garrett. I drove to his city and I sat in his kitchen and I told him all of it, the notes, the second photograph, the river. And Garrett, who had been patient and thoughtful through all of this, said something that I have turned over in my mind almost every day since. He said, "He's not trying to scare you, he's trying to make sure you know he's real." And I said, "Why would he need to do that?" And Garrett said, "Because at some point he was willing to let the world think he didn't exist. He needs at least one person to know that he does." That is when I understood the loneliness of what Marcus Ellery had done. Not the logistics of faking your death, which are considerable and which I had been thinking about in technical terms since July. Not the patience of it, the decade of absence, but the loneliness, the absolute and total erasure of a self from the world, and then the slow, private, unmistakable need to be witnessed by at least one person who had known you when you were real. I believe, and I want to be clear that this is belief rather than evidence, that Marcus Ellery faked his death in 2011 to escape something. I do not know what. I considered financial trouble, which is common, and I considered a different identity, a past he had constructed the current Marcus Ellery to avoid, which the discrepancy in hometown suggested, and I considered something darker, some situation or person he was hiding from, which the quiet thoroughness of his disappearance also suggested. Whatever the reason, he had been gone for 5 years before he started watching me. 5 years of complete absence, and then something changed in 2016, and he began, slowly, carefully, to re-establish a kind of connection. Not contact. Connection. There is a difference. He never spoke to me. He never sent a letter with a return address. He rearranged the evidence of himself around the edges of my life and waited to see if I would notice. And then in October I found the notebook Not my brown composition notebook, a different notebook. This one was sitting on the shelf in my home office between two books that I rarely moved, and I would not have noticed it if I hadn't been reorganizing that shelf, looking for a reference book I needed. It was a black notebook, slim, and when I opened it, it was filled with handwriting I didn't recognize. Precise, small, controlled handwriting, the kind that comes from someone who was taught penmanship and took it seriously. And the contents of that notebook were a record of my life, from approximately 2014 to the present, written in the third person, dates and observations, but not just behavior. There was interpretation in it too. This man seems content with his solitude, but wakes early on weekends, suggesting the schedule is chosen rather than preferred. His neighbor leaves her porch light on from dusk to 11. He sometimes watches it from his kitchen window before bed, which tells you he finds comfort in evidence that other people exist nearby, even if he does not seek them out. I sat on my office floor and I read that notebook cover to cover. It took almost 2 hours, and what I felt reading it was not entirely fear, or rather, the fear was layered under something more complicated. I felt seen. I felt seen with a degree of accuracy and care that I had not felt, possibly ever, and by someone who had chosen to express that attention in the most oblique and frightening way possible. He knew me. He had spent years learning me, quietly, from the outside, and what he had written was not cruel. There was no cruelty in it. It was precise and it was observational, and occasionally it was almost tender in the way it noticed things, small things, the way I leave a book open face down on the arm of the couch when I'm going to come back to it, the way I always check that the back door is locked twice before I go upstairs, the specific brand of coffee I buy, and the fact that I buy it in the large size even though I live alone, which, he wrote, suggests either optimism about how much I'll want or a reluctance to run out of something I rely on. Near the end of the notebook, in an entry that appeared to be from the previous spring, there was a single paragraph that was different in tone from the rest. It was written in the first person, and it said, "I have thought about whether what I am doing is wrong. I have been thinking about it for years. I think the answer is that it is technically wrong, and that the reasons for it being wrong are real and valid, and that I am doing it anyway, because the alternative is to not exist at all, not even as a memory in the mind of someone who once ate lunch across a table from me and asked what I thought of the project going on at the mill site, and listened to my answer like it mattered. The alternative is to be so thoroughly gone that even the act of grieving for me was performed and concluded and placed in the past. I cannot accept that. I do not know what that says about me. I do not know what that says about me either. I have thought about it for months and I still don't. I never found out where Marcus Ellery is. I looked carefully and methodically, and I followed every thread I could find, and every thread went cold before it reached anything like an address or a face or a present tense version of the man I had known. I know he was in this area at various points over the past several years. I know he had access to my house once, possibly more than once, and that the access was clean, no damage, no trace beyond the photographs and eventually the notebook. I know that someone with his training and patience could learn a great deal about the rhythms of a rural property and the habits of its single occupant. I know that an oak tree at the edge of my property has a branch at about 16 feet that has some bark scraped off in a way that is consistent with a boot pressing against it. I know that in November, after I had read the notebook and spent several weeks sitting with everything I knew, I left my own notebook on the kitchen table, my brown composition notebook, open to a page near the middle, and I wrote one sentence on that page. I wrote, "I came to the river, and I left it there overnight, and in the morning I checked it, and nothing had changed, and I checked it the next morning, and nothing had changed, and on the third morning the notebook was closed, which is not how I had left it." He read it. I believe he read it. I believe he came into my house in the night, the way he had before, silently and without any trace, except the small difference of a closed notebook versus an open one. And he read the sentence I had written, and he left. I don't know if that was enough. I don't know what enough would mean in this context, or whether the concept of enough applies to what Marcus Ellery built across 10 years of careful and persistent invisibility. I still keep the composition notebook. I still write in it, not as much, but regularly I have thought about moving, but I have not moved. I have thought about why, and I think the honest answer is that I want him to be able to find me. Not because I am not frightened, I am. There is a frequency of fear underneath the routine of my days that I don't think will go away. A low and persistent awareness that the distance between being observed and not knowing it is much smaller than I once thought. But because the alternative is the one he described in his notebook. The alternative is to be so thoroughly gone that no one is looking. My neighbor's porch light has been on every night this week, except Wednesday. On Wednesday it was off by 9, which is earlier than usual, and I stood at my kitchen window a little longer than I typically do, watching the dark where the light usually is, noticing the absence. I fell asleep thinking about it. In the morning, the light was back. I don't know what to do with the fact that I checked. I don't know what to do with the fact that without fully deciding to, I have become someone who monitors the patterns around me, who notices when something is 18 inches off, who reads the light on a neighbor's porch like a sentence. I think Marcus Ellery taught me that. I think that might have been the point. The recycling bin this week was placed back facing the correct direction, handle toward the street, exactly where I leave it. And it has been that way for 2 months now, always correct, always precise, as though whoever was moving it has learned, finally, which direction the handle is supposed to face. I don't know if that is a good sign or a very bad one. I wrote it in the notebook. I wrote it down and I closed the notebook and I put it back in the desk drawer and I went to bed and I checked the lock on the back door twice, the way I always do, and I lay in the dark and I listened to the quiet of 3 acres of rural land. And I thought about what it means to be known, and whether being known and being watched are as different as we tell ourselves they are. The porch light is on tonight. I checked.